Yeah.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Art Talk. This time, my guest is the amazing Dirk van Dulmen, my good friend and fellow artist. He is such an inspiring artist and worked for Apple TV, Blender Studios. You got to help me out here, but your track record is growing and growing. Working, I think at Blender you worked with some of Pixar's veterans. To
Yes.
create a short film. I don't know if I'm allowed to say anything about that, but welcome and thank you for having this chat with me.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Wouter, for inviting me to chat about what we're going to be chatting about. And you're right. I've been working recently for Blender Studio on a short film that they just announced. And
just before, I don't know if I mentioned it, but you are a story artist. For people who don't know what that is, could you explain what a story artist is and does?
Yes, I think a story or a storyboard artist is usually comes in when the project has a script. That means a written word that needs to be translated in images, and that's usually when a storyboard artist is attached to a project. And it's usually in the pre-production phase of a project. And and your responsibility is to translate the written script into drawings and images that can then go into production and be executed into a final film. There's many subtle differences between projects on what your exact responsibilities are, I think, ranging from working in commercials, live action, feature film, or TV. Those are four of the main areas, I think, where storyboard artists tend to work in. And each one has I think a very specific skill set if you're hired for a project in one of those areas. Yeah.
So how is
that makes sense?
a storyboard for a television series different than for a feature film, for example?
Well, and I can only, of course, speak from my own personal experience, but from my personal experience, that's very much the case. And it's different in the sense that in TV, the narrative that you are given or the script is usually a locked version of the story. And if you work on an original TV series, then there's still, the tone of the storytelling is still, and the tone of how you tell the story is still to be discovered. But if you work on a second or third season, then there's a certain way of telling the story, and you would have to serve that. In feature film, I think the narrative that is given, it depends. If if you start early on a feature, then there's still room to explore, usually. But if you come in later on a feature film project, then the assignments tend to be maybe even more specific, because a lot of the storytelling or the narrative has already been figured out. So those, I think, are the biggest. I think those are the biggest difference between a feature film and TV.
Okay.
Of course, the exception is maybe, and I don't have any experience in that, but if you have a board-driven TV show where you you are likely to be teamed up with a fellow story artist, and you both write and develop the story and also draw the storyboards. I mean, that's
Okay,
sort
yeah.
of that's sort of another way of making
Okay.
making work. Yeah.
So I know actually you weren't always a storyboard artist, and I remember when we met, we met I think at CTN, not in the Netherlands, but at CTN for the first time,
Yeah.
and we both went there to try and break into the movie industry. Could you explain a little bit about your journey? Because I think a lot of people have the desire to do what you do, but don't know how to get there. And obviously, each person has a different way to eventually get there. But I think it can be inspiring to hear how you approached it, and what was it that made you take this decision? Why did you want to do this, and how did you go about trying to achieve that?
Yes, I was very much in, like you mentioned in your question, I was very much in the same position where I had the desire to maybe pursue a working career in animation, but I had no idea how to get there, or even what to do in that industry. What would be my task? And um, it, I mean, looking back now, it took me about 10 years since I graduated from art school to figure out that the job that I was maybe I could be a good fit for was in story. I was in storyboarding, but it took me a good 10 years to get to that conclusion. Um, and I came to the conclusion because in 2011, I think, I was then working in the game industry, in the casual game industry, as a 2D all-round artist. And we, as a studio, were very much interested in how storytelling worked and how storytelling works in film, animation, but also in games. Um, and because of that, I also started to sort of get a new interest in animation. And I stumbled upon a masterclass that was to be given in the Netherlands by a Dutch storyboard artist, Piet Kroon, who has been working in the States for a long time. And he was to travel to the Netherlands to give a 6-day masterclass, it was called. And I signed up for that. And basically when Pete arrived the first morning, and he that was the first time someone explained to me in words and in images the job of what a storyboard artist does and what kind of skills that you need for it. And I kind of recognized it as being, oh my God, I can see myself.
Eureka!
Yeah, it's kind of a eureka moment, for sure. Recognizing myself, that some of those skills I might already possess, and some I was very interested to, and I could probably develop. And that might give me a chance to then maybe pursue working in the animation industry. It was May 2011, and basically from that moment on, I decided that in my spare time, I was going to work on developing those skills. And from my previous experience of working as a freelance artist after graduating, I did that for about 4 or 5 years. Had a small company with a good friend of mine, collaborating, and I knew that networking and getting to know the industry or people in the industry was also an important part of maybe one day landing a job.
Hmm.
And that's what made me go to CTN
Okay.
in 2011 for the first time. And I think the year after, that's when we met. And in 2011, I was at CTN. I was there to see what the industry was about, to get a feel for it. And I managed to get in touch with the help of Pete to meet some people, to visit some studios, see them from the inside, and talk to artists at the CTN convention. And from then on, I kind of recognized, I think this is, you know, I can see myself in a couple of years maybe finding a place to.
So it didn't, because sometimes people ask me this, when you go to an event like that and show your portfolio, does that immediately give you a job? How did that happen for you? How did you go from attending CTN to becoming someone actually working?
So at the time I attended CTN, I was working in the game industry as an artist. So I had a job, working,
Okay,
you know, drawing for a living. And I was very conscious, I think, that I didn't expect to land a job on my first visit. I was really there to sort of, how do you say that? To remove that foggy curtain or that bubble that I thought the animation industry was. You know, you have all these art books and you have all these. And internet was, you know, you could see all this stuff on the internet, and it seemed all very far away. I didn't know how to get close to it, and being at CTN, I think, brought me closer to seeing that what it kind of was about. And I kind of just said to myself, well, it's going to take however long it's going to take, you know. I'm employed now. I had fun working where I was working. And I'm just going to probably slowly develop my skills up to a level where it is, where I am can be considered hireable. And
how did you do
basically
that?
Sorry?
How did you do that? Because how did you develop your skills, and how did you check if what you were learning was the thing that you needed to know, or that it was good enough? Or
so coming back from CTN, I knew the main feedback was, if you want to be a storyboard artist, you have to put storyboards in your portfolio. So the goal was to then build a storyboard portfolio. And besides CTN, which is in November, there's also another big animation event in Annecy, which is in June in France. And I decided that I would also go to Annecy the next time in 2012 to also get to know more of the, let's say, European side of the industry. Being at CTN, I noticed there were opportunities to take online classes. And first I tried to, you know, create my projects and storyboards just by myself, but motivation, I kind of lost motivation or the interest in what I was doing. So I signed up for one of these online classes where an industry pro would teach, and you would create assignments and he would feedback you. And that seemed to work very well for me to start building my portfolio.
Okay.
And basically what I did, what it came down to, what I did is, so June and November are kind of like 6 months apart. So every time I would work on my portfolio for like 6 months, I would take a class during those 6 months, and then I would go to either NSC or CTM to show my new portfolio, get feedback, and go back and kind of, repeat the process.
Oh, that's really cool. So actually, the first thing you did, just summarizing, the first thing you did was to get a really clear idea of what it is that you wanted to do when you went to the workshop of Piet Kroon. Then you went to the United States just to see what it actually was, and then knowing even better what it is you wanted to do, you knew also what you needed to work on so you would have, because you gotten feedback, and now you're constantly repeating the process of studying, creating a new work, and checking with someone where you stand, so you know what the next thing is you need to work on.
Yeah, exactly.
Seems like a
using
solid
the conventions.
process.
Sorry?
Seems like a solid process.
After doing it a couple of times, I noticed that for me it worked. Taking an online class in between those conventions gave me the right motivation to actually finish the assignments and finish work that I could put in my portfolio. And talking at the events to industry people, they could very quickly sort of, give me feedback on specific things that I needed to improve on. And basically after about 3 years of doing this, 3.5 years, the feedback would be, your portfolio is getting up to a point where it's very interesting for studios, and have you considered sending it around, and coming back from one of these conventions from CTN, I think in 2013, I decided, yes, it's time to start sending it around and approaching studios, which I did. And then within a couple of months, I landed some potential leads, which landed in turned into a first gig, and that's when I started. and I've been lucky to ever since I've been working on all kinds of projects. Yeah.
Oh, was that also the moment you quit your job in the gaming industry?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was, I think, early 2014. There was a show that I could storyboard on for an episode of a TV show, and I then decided, well, this is going to be the moment, because I needed a month full time to be available to do this work.
Yeah.
And I couldn't combine it with doing a full time job, so I decided to take the plunge again and go to a freelance life again. And luckily it worked out.
Well, it's interesting. It took you 10 years to know what you wanted to do, and only 3 years to actually get there. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, looking back, if I would look at I think I always enjoyed the process of storyboarding the most, but I've never studied animation, so I wasn't aware of that job title. I didn't know it existed, but looking back, I maybe I could have figured it out sooner, but it went away. It went, and I don't know. Looking back, that's the thing I've always been doing, I think.
But also the studying, you didn't stop studying after you started working as a story artist? Because I know you as someone who is always doing, making studies of movies, watching tons of movies to understand how they work, reading books, going out, doing life drawing, going out, drawing in the streets. It's like
Yeah.
you're on all the time.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's true. These are all kind of little study exercises that I continuously do and keep doing. And I've accumulated all these exercises over the years of taking online courses, whereas each individual teacher would have advised me to, practice this type of exercise. You should practice this, or you should practice this. And I think also from my childhood, playing a musical instrument and doing sports, you kind of learn the experience of that practice. With practice, you will improve. If you practice, like for instance, with playing a musical instrument, if you practice every day, then you will improve your playing. And if you didn't practice that week and you went to your music lesson, the teacher immediately knew, okay, you haven't been practicing this week, because I noticed your instrument sounds different. You don't know, you don't know the melodies. You've been slacking. And and I think I took that with me, realizing that if I want to pursue working in storyboarding, then I need to put in the hours of practice in order to get there. So yeah, anything I could I could find or read or watch that would help me become maybe a better story artist, I would. Ever since I did that class with Pete, I sort of embraced everything. Like I dropped other things that I was also interested in, like color, for instance. I stopped drawing in color. I just focused on value, becoming better.
So you're really focused on what you want to do.
Yeah. I decided that because I'd been working as a sort of a generic artist for over 10 years, doing all types of different jobs, from painting murals to doing art direction to some graphic design to illustration to doing comics, in the game industry, where we did everything from coming up with the storylines and the stories to doing, in the end, the marketing material. For me, it was also a desire to become maybe more of a specialist than a generalist. Okay. After working as a generalist for 10 years. And I threw all my eggs in the basket of storyboarding.
Well, it worked out, clearly.
Well,
but it's not just you're not just studying because you feel like you need to be good enough, or at least what it looks like to me. It's also pure excitement. You're just so curious and excited about learning new things. So many times when you're reading a book, you're on fire. Wow, this is how it works. I remember we had some discussions a while ago about telling a story in one image, and we both would come up with theories of what are questions you can ask yourself to make a story, a design in one image communicate stronger or clearer. And these this resulted in some kind of a checklist where, because this is actually illustration. If you have just one image and you're telling a story, you're basically doing an illustration. And in illustration, you often don't want to give away everything. If you explain everything of your story, then it's not interesting to look at, because you want to have the viewer imagine stuff as well, or put in their own experience or what they know about it. But at the same time, you want your idea to come across. If it's too much different things happening at the same time, or it's unclear, then your story doesn't come across. And so it's a nice balance that you can look for within an illustration. And it's, you know, a drawing only communicates when your message has reached the viewer. You can think you're communicating, but if someone is looking and don't understand it, there is no communication. What was it that you were talking about at that time? Information out of order. You remember what
Well, yeah, it's something I heard Mark Andrews say at the Lightbox Expo 2 years ago already. His talk was on storytelling, and one of the things he said that really resonated with me is information out of order creates confusion.
Yes, that's
and it. I think because as a storyboard artist or in storyboarding, you always work with a given narrative. I think it's your skill to successfully execute the narration of the narrative. So the narrative is the story, but you are in charge of the telling of the story. And so you have to understand, you know, what the intention is of the
exactly. Yes.
written narrative. And if the intention is to confuse, you know, in the scene or that you're working on, if the intention is that it should be confusing for the audience, then you want to consciously
put the information out of order.
Put information out of order, or do things, you know, in composition or timing or color or acting or in dialogue that will create the feeling of confusion for the audience. And in retrospect, if there's a very specific, I mean, the scene always has a specific function within the whole narrative. So you need to understand the function, you need to recognize it.
Yes.
And I think you need to very consciously then put together the correct order, or come up with an order of information so that it's not confusing for the audience, but they get exactly what you know, they need to know for the story in order to get the overall narrative. And I think that's that's for me what it kind of comes down to, is that story is at the base of everything. Whether you make a single image, whether you have a single image to tell a story, or whether you have 90 minutes of images to tell a story, whether you can, like in a comic book, you know, stay on a page and flip through the book yourself, or like in sitting in a theater or cinema and watching the screen, and you know, you can't stop the film. The story, I think, is always at the basis, and the story you're trying to tell will inform all the decisions that you make.
Yes, and so I would think that color could play an important role in that as well. Still, most storyboards are color isn't used there, but you do use your camera standpoint, and you also edit the scenes in different ways. So you're really one of the first to actually create what the movie is going to be. How important is the point of view that you choose? Does that, you know, because I know that you create hundreds of scenes, and not all of them will end up in the movie, but how important is that part of telling your story
Well,
in a
it's
movie?
I think, well, specifically point of view is is one tool you can use um, in the telling of the story. Um, uh, you know, it's there's very different stages when you are working in storyboarding. I think um, it can be that you're doing a first pass on a written sequence um, that has very clear direction from your director or head of story, and that's exactly how they want you to kind of execute it. Um, and maybe and after that, the conversation can start if it's the right approach, and can we improve it, and can we do a second pass on it. Um, uh, but sometimes also the assignments can be much more open, um, uh, and then it's more up to you to come up with a fitting idea of the telling of the story,
Yeah.
and then point of view and knowing whose scene it is basically. And if you then decide to tell the story from the main character's point of view or the villain's point of view or another character, or tell it objectively or subjectively, or a combination of it, um, I think that's the process a storyboard artist is given. He's given the chance to to tell it. The first time you can do a sequence, that's the time you can tell it the way you think it should be told, and then after that, it's the dialogue starts about notes, adjustments, making it fitting better in the overall story, or um, point of view. I mean, point of view is one of the tools you can use. Yeah.
Okay. What other tools do you have?
Yeah, there's an the fun. Yeah, I think the funny thing is, there are to me there are no rules in filmmaking or storytelling. Basically, you can
Hmm.
do whatever you want. Um, um, but the more specific the more specific the narrative is, and the more specific the emotion is that you want to get across for the audience, the more specific you have to choose your tools to do that. um,
Well, one thing I think is interesting is that you have time as a tool, because a lot of artists, they draw
yeah,
drawings. Well, animators have time as well as one of their tools, but I
yeah,
think that must be something uh, quite new when you first are aware that that's part of your toolbox.
yeah. It you can use it. Yes, you can very much use time and how it is edited and the pacing of 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 panels, and you display your ideas about that in when you're pitching your scene to your director. Then it's your time to kind of showcase how you think the scene could play. But you also have to be comfortable with then the materials handed off to an editor and the director, and they kind of they start to also play with it in the edit suite, and that can sometimes lead to new insights and new ways of editing the material. Um, but yeah, timing is an interesting and powerful tool. Um,
Has it ever been a problem for you that someone else takes your scene and edits it in a different way or changes it?
No, I don't. No, I don't think so. I've never found it difficult in the sense that you kind of have to understand it's not. Yeah, you're helping the director make his. You're serving his telling of the story. Of course, he or she is the one that gets you in his or her team, because you maybe have certain sensibilities that are a good fit for the type of story he wants to be telling. So you can definitely have an influence, but in the end, it's I kind of think like contributing a wrong idea that leads to the right idea is also contributing to the story, right? To the making of the story. Sometimes it helps that you do something that's not working.
Yeah.
And because and I think if you realize that, and also if you realize that every time that I work on a sequence, it's a version of the story. It's not the final version. It's not the first version. It's a version. And based on and because you then can see how it's working, then you can do another version if there's time.
Yeah, I think that looking at it like that really helps not to take it personally.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's just a completely different way of looking at it. It's not about your creation. It's just part of finding the best way to tell the story.
Yeah, I mean that's I truly think that's that's the job, coming up with a version of telling the story, and then being able to come up with another version of telling the same story, and another one, and another one, and another one. It's because there is not one correct way of doing it. There's no book you can look up the correct order or the correct way to edit or the correct way to tell this story. It depends on what comes before, and it depends on what comes after.
Yeah.
So I think as a storyboard artist, you have to be aware of that process.
And when you work on a feature, are you involved in the entire story, or do you get only a certain part? Because I can imagine if that's the case, it can be hard to understand what the role of that sequence is in the entire story.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends per project. I think usually you are given the entire script to read, so you can have a good idea of the overall the overall story, and it's so then you can kind of understand better where your scene fits in. Is it the introduction of the characters? Do we see one of the characters in your sequence for the first time, or do we already know certain information and skills and stuff about him, so that you can then sort of play with those skills that the audience already knows?
Yeah.
And it kind of depends if how late you are attached to a project. If there's already like a second or third screening, if like the second screening has already happened for a feature, and they're doing the third, then usually probably the work is more specific. And you already have some material you can maybe watch of other versions that have been tried before. And sometimes they actually, they want you to see those. And sometimes the director says, well, I think you shouldn't see those. And we're just curious about your take on the material.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's different every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's so interesting about story. That's why it's so, to come back to, like, to continue reading about it, it's, story is such a enormous subject with so many things working together, um, that you can never understand everything at once. It's, every time you learn a little bit more about this, and then that opens a door to what
Yeah.
about this, and what about that. So it's an endless, it's an endless subject of to study and learn from and learn about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I think is a common thing story artists that start out run into is that they want to draw a beautiful drawing every panel. And in story, it's not so much about beautiful drawings. It's really, sometimes storyboards are extremely rough, just scribbles. I can imagine if you just start out, it can be hard handing in boards that are so rough. They might be great boards, but just because you want to feel that, well, you want to show I can draw, how, what's that balance, and how did you find the right balance in what a board needs to look like?
Yeah, I think what you hear people usually say in storyboarding, it's more important to draw clear, have clarity in your drawing, than draw clean. So clarity, I think, no matter your skill of drawing, the drawing should be clear to read.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that's important. And if you can do a quick scribble that reads clearly, then that scribble could serve as a that could function then in the storyboard. And I think also, like, the scribbly nature or the rough nature of storyboards you sometimes see is in boards has also to do with time and deadlines. And sometimes there is literally very little time to execute a new updated version of a part of a sequence. And then basically the only way to get it done is to sort of draw it, let's say, fast and in a very shorthand type of drawing. And then they end up in the final thing, and you look at them a few months later and you're like, whoa, what was I thinking? And sometimes those drawings really survive for a long time.
Yeah. Well, that proves the fact that it's not about how well they are drawn, or at least it's more like how effectively they're drawn.
It kind of depends on the type of project. If you have a project where the storyboards are sent to another studio in a different country with a different language who might not have read the script, then the storyboards need to be extremely clear and extremely clean, because they will use it to, continue working on those boards. If the storyboards are meant to, to be used in a pitch to get funding for a project, I think also you want to have the drawings to have a certain, appeal and a sort of cleanliness to it, so that it's also nice to look at.
Yeah.
But if the boards are used internally to figure out the telling of the story, then I think there's much more room to leave things rough and scribbly, and
Yeah, it's more like thinking out loud on the paper.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's very much depend on the needs of the project and
Yeah.
the needs of also the pipeline that is attached to a project. Um, yeah, yeah.
What are specific things that excite you in a project? What are you looking for when you take on a project?
Hmm.
Or do you have a specialty within storyboarding? You know, I think some artists are really great at scenes that involve many characters, or some are
Mm.
great at gags. Or is there some part of storyboarding that you prefer?
Well, I think it's some. I mean, sometimes it can be a project can be interesting because of the people you're going to be collaborating with, and maybe seeing or knowing of the experience those people have working in the industry, that it would be very interesting to get some time to work with those people and learn
Yeah.
from them. That could be then maybe the material or the type of story might not be what interested you, but it's the crew or the people attached. And sometimes it also can be maybe that a type of show or a type of film or a type of story that you've always been dreamt of working on, a certain IP or a certain of existing project, or that it's having worked on a number of existing IPs. For a while, I was very interested to maybe get a chance to work on something original, because it's a different. I was curious if it's a different process than working on an existing IP.
Yeah.
But I think immersing yourself into a world, whether it's an original world or an existing IP, it's the same. It's you kind of I kind of enjoy diving in, learning more about the topic, the series, the type of storytelling, the way of composition, staging, the blocking. Um, you know, yeah, I think that's what I enjoy about working on project. It's getting familiar with the style, and I don't think it's very important for me that I already know it really well, or that I'm or that I'm already skilled in it. Um, yeah, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes,
No,
absolutely.
yeah, I think it goes back to the school that I went to. I studied industrial design, a school for industrial design, the design academy, and in that school, the process was always more important than the end result.
Hmm.
You were graded on the process and your improvement in getting better at the
Okay.
process, and the process meant that you would start with a subject or or an object or a word or whatever, and you would kind of dive in and then decide what it is that you wanted to make. And if that would involve welding, then you would have to then they would say, your teachers would say, well, then find a way to learn to weld, or find
Hmm.
someone that can weld, or um, and the next project, it would be maybe knitting, and you had learned to weld, and now it is knitting, and so you would have to go like, oh, maybe I can learn it myself, or maybe I can
Yeah.
hire people or find people that can do it for me. And I think that's the same with storyboarding. I mean, you're always are given a narrative, and it's about something. It has a topic, it has a theme, and it has a world. So you then kind of dive in and
Yeah. Immerse yourself in
investigate and
that world.
research,
Yes.
and learn about um,
Yeah, that's
learn
what I
about
like. You get to dive into a world or a way of thinking or a culture or anything, even with illustration, when I did that, you know, the assignments you get, they force you to think about stuff or draw stuff that you would never
Yeah.
do for yourself. And
Yeah.
so you always learn so much from that.
Yeah. And I think also what is fun is uh, also to, you know, to have to put your own, you know, to put your own experiences onto the project, um, so that it also becomes, you know, authentic in a way, because there's certain details that are specific to you because you have experienced it, that you can also sometimes
Yeah.
attach to a scene or some action and that happens. I mean,
Well, I think that's uh, what you do when you go out and draw these drawings like the one behind you.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
you fill your visual vocabulary with stuff and personal experiences. Um,
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's
but also you have,
observing life,
yes,
simply
but
stated.
you have a clear approach, because when you do these drawings, there's always some kind of story in there. When I look at the one behind you, know that
Mm.
person there adjusting something on her bike. Without her, it's just a portrait of all these bikes. But this makes it a story that, you know, makes you it it uh, it it ignites something in my mind, thinking what kind of girl is this, and you know, the whole scene around it. It gives me this information just enough to think of a whole world with that thing that she's doing. And I think that's really great. But I've noticed that that's really how you draw. It's sometimes you add stuff that isn't there, or you change stuff, uh, but it always, story is really the leading thing in these drawings for you.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you're able to tell yourself the story of the moment that you're observing, then it's also not necessary for all the, you know, elements to stay there in place so that you can draw them.
Mm.
It's like seeing like this scene with the bikes, um, seeing the girl, observing the girl fiddling with her bike chain. Um, that was something that I thought was interesting to see at that moment, and so I can explain that little story to myself, and then she can kind of go away
Yeah.
because I kind of then know what the drawing needs to communicate. So I don't need to have the model or, you know, or all the elements
Yeah, it's not about the
present.
perfect rendering of observational drawing, but it's
Yeah.
really about the story. So it doesn't matter if the girl looks exactly like the girl that was actually there.
No, you know, exactly. And I think you can even while you're drawing it, you can try to maybe even plus the whole, you know, the situation a little bit. Um, but I think, you know, that, and I think that's what really resonates with people looking at work. If people look at work that tells a story successfully, um, it gets a, you know, the audience gets a real emotional response, and that's always very strong. That always
Yeah.
works. Those drawings, they can, yeah, they get an interesting reaction. And yeah, so that yeah, so I think, you know, starting with a story is always a good, um, is always a good place to begin with.
Mm. And then the materials. I noticed you often draw directly with pen
Yeah,
when you're out drawing. No
yeah,
eraser or pencils or anything.
no.
Is there a reason for that?
Um, um, Yes, I think so. I mean, the reason is, it goes back to, I think, when I was in school, at the design academy. The I did the direction of mobility for like a half a year, and the drawing teacher there forced us to draw with you know not with pencils and erasers, but with markers and straight ballpoints and stuff. So that's, I think, where I've picked it up, and by having a tool that is permanent and direct, it will create it will build confidence in your lines and in the type of concentration that you will go into to do the drawing.
Oh, awesome.
And then and I think if you then succeed in doing, let's say, a successful drawing straight in pen, then it has this very direct, amazing quality to it.
Yeah.
And it's faster. You don't have to draw the drawing twice, like do it in pencil and then maybe trace it. And therefore I think it's very suitable to do it that way if you're also working in storyboarding, because in storyboarding, I think it's also a good habit to just draw it and don't, sketch and then trace and then trace again and clean up again. It's just, draw the board, draw it, learn to draw clear and quick
and it's interesting because of that, it also has this quality of, when you do a sketch, those drawings often are really appealing because you see that the artist was searching for the right line or something, but it has this spontaneity in it. And often people tell me that they have a hard time drawing their final drawing and have it have as much life in it as the original sketch. And basically you just skip that whole step and your finished drawing is at the same time the sketch. And that's, I think, also the appeal of these drawings is that it is what it is. There's no correction or hesitation, and I think it's really true. I experienced that myself, that you get to a level of concentration because you can't erase. So and you start, and also the other to the other direction, you start to accept that you can't erase. So when you draw a line that isn't in the right place, you have to deal with it. There's no going back, there's no Control Z.
It's committing to the choices you kind of make. So usually what happens also, I think, is that I visualize a lot, pre-visualize in my head what the composition, what the drawing could potentially look like. Like, I don't see an exact clear image, but I do kind of.
What do you visualize then? What do you see? I think that's interesting.
I think I see if I observe a moment that has story in it, in real life, I think I almost look at it if I would have to, if I would take a photo, or how I would frame it, how I would, how do I turn this into a drawing? And I kind of think I do that step in my head before I start drawing. So I've noticed there's people.
You see basically the rough composition. Is that it?
Yeah, I think I composed the story I composed the drawing in my mind, and then I start putting it on paper, and I kind of react to, of course, what I'm doing as well, but I kind of know where things need to go.
Yeah.
And I've also noticed that there's also there's another way of drawing where people kind of start drawing on the page, and then they kind of react to what's happening, and then they kind of adjust, or they do a second try. I think I'm looking more like a photographer, maybe, when I'm observing, and then I, put that moment on the paper.
But it also sounds like a combination of both ways, because you do that first, but then at the same time, when you start drawing, you're also reacting and adjusting on the go, right?
Yes, but that it means when when you've placed a certain character in a certain spot, then you kind of build, you build around it. But you can't move the character like you can in digital, right? So you kind of commit. So yeah, then you kind of commit to your choices based off the the pre-visualization that you did in your mind of what the image maybe could look like, or what the composition should be to serve that story observation you just did. And
cool.
It can even mean seeing it happen and kind of rotating it, or pulling things forward and pushing things backward, because it would make a more pleasing composition.
Okay, wow. Even when you're on the spot drawing it, you can just move a tree over there to get a better composition.
Because that sometimes you see the story happening and you're like, oh, it would be great if the tree would be over there, and if I would have this, and maybe, oh, there's an item. It's the same in storyboarding. You sometimes there is no given set design yet, and you have to create the set. So then you start inventing shapes and objects to place in the frame to serve the storytelling. And that's, I think I take that practice with me when I go draw on the street from life. Cool. Sometimes, not always, but you kind of move things or adjust things or cheat things a little bit, because the goal is not to copy.
Well, I wouldn't call it cheating, because that has a certain feel to it, and I think it has nothing to do with cheating. I think it's rather the opposite, because it's more like being a conductor of an orchestra, and you decide what instrument group you want to hear at that point, and you don't want to hear them all at the same time, because that would make a horrible noise. So you just, these have to fade out now, and these have to come up. So I think it proves a measure of control rather than cheating, because I have a problem with the word cheating in art.
No, I totally understand what you mean. It's not that you kind of trick the audience of the reality, because maybe the object or there's actually one tree in real life on that square, and you put 3 in them or something.
But then again, it's all an interpretation of reality, and it's all.
But it's very interesting to sometimes then see a reaction of people onto a drawing that I did from observing, but I kind of added a little something to sort of to make the story read even a little bit more clear. And they still recognize, I so recognize it, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of cool. It's like a magic trick, like I know it's working, it's fun to see that it's working even better.
That's cool. Well, I think we've talked for an hour already. So
already? Oh yeah, we did.
Well, thank you very much. It's really, really inspiring and amazing. I was wondering, is there anything you want to mention? A website or a project or a thing that you're working on? Or I know that you have this website where you share inspiring videos.
It's sort of it's a backlog sort of videos and books and things that on the topic of storyboarding that I think that are very interesting. That's on the website called storybeard.net. And if people want to see the studies that film studies I do, or some of the observational drawing from life, they can find that on my Instagram, which is just my full name. It's like at Dirk van Dulmen. I think.
Okay.
Is that how you say it? Yeah.
Dirk van
Dulmen.
Dulmen.
Yeah. I think that that online,
Okay.
that's it.
Okay. Cool. Well, it was great
Yeah.
talking to you, and I wish you all the best on your next project.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always fun chatting on this topic together.
Absolutely.
So thanks for the invite, and
Oh, you're welcome.
we'll see each other. We'll talk to each other soon.
Okay.
All right.